So it was a tremendous income hit. And then the balance sheets, losses, and who has what savings and so on. And then how is that dealt with? And in order to understand that, you have to realize that there are these holes in income and the holes in the balance sheets. And then you have to realize that there is the production of money and credit. And who produces that money and credit? Okay, the money and credit comes in different flavors. There is US dollar money and credit. There is euro dollar money and credit. And so when you look at the world and you're seeing a situation that is the same as existed really in the 1930 to 45 period, in that now we're seeing the production of a lot of debt, a lot of borrowing by the government. We're seeing zero interest rates and not the traditional kind of monetary policy, but the producing of a lot of money and credit. So the Federal Reserve is buying the Treasury's debt, and the Treasury is getting that money to mostly Americans in some imperfect but remarkably large way. And the Europeans are doing the same in their way. That bank is a smaller bank because the world lives with about 70% dollars and only a small percent euro, and they will produce theirs for theirs. And there aren't many banks around the world. And so the rest of the world is going to have gaps, holes that won't be filled. So if you think about that and you say, American printing of money and the borrowing will leave us with a lot of debt and monetization. Who will pay these bills? But you will know that you will get that money, and that the Europeans will get their versions of that money. But we are in a new world, and that world is most similar to the 1930 to 45 world, and a lot of the world will not get that money and credit. So there'll be a big differentiation as to which entities benefit and which entities don't. And there'll be a big collaboration as to how we will deal with that bill and who will end up with what. A big question of wealth distribution and all of that. So that's the big thing that's going to be happening. We see something like $20 trillion of losses. Okay, we see, so if you work that through and you say you don't have money and you don't have credit, your business can fail. You know this, we see this all around us. So there can be failures when there can't be payments. And so the question is, who gets what check to make those payments and get past it? But we're going to have a giant restructuring of the IOUs, and we're going to work out when hospitals can go broke, because this is terribly costly for hospitals, and they will not fully recover their losses. Hospitals will go broke, even though we know that they need them. So when you have to go entity by entity through this, and then you'll go through the process of who will pay. Things go down. Too much leverage means you're broke in accounting terms. So then you look around and you say, who are the systemically important entities that you don't want to go broke? Because do you want to lose those banks at this time? And then you can make up money and make up credit, and you can keep them alive in some way. And you did it with banks, and through the banks there were the mortgages, and that's what it looked like. This is more complex than that, because there are the banks, and then there are all of those that are beyond banks. All of the little businesses, all of those in all the different places that are beyond it. And it's a bigger crisis, and we have a less effective monetary policy because interest rates declines have reached their limit, and just buying financial assets by the central bank and buying the normal financial assets won't work. They have to buy the debt of the government, and the government, or the many governments, have to be effective in getting buying power and production to those who need it around the world. The greatest force through time is inventiveness, human inventiveness, adaptability. So you're going to see these restructurings happen, and it's the power of that adaptation that is the greatest power. I did a study, which is on LinkedIn if anyone wants to see it, and it takes, it goes back 500 years, and it shows real GDP. In other words, the economic activity going back there. And there's a line. And you don't see these depressions, as we're calling them, even on that line. They barely wiggles. When you go into it and you look at that piece, that's what it looks like. GDP falls 10%, unemployment goes up, and it passes. And because the greatest force is the force of adaptation and inventiveness if we can operate well together. So that's what I think it's going to look like over this period of time. It'll pass. The world will be very different. There'll be a new world order. But it will pass and we'll be inventive, because what we're dealing with now is just money and credit. Money and credit is just digital. We're giving 60,000 computers to poor students so that they can learn. You know, the difference between a rich and a poor student is having a computer and having the ability to learn. And I want to thank those who would be embarrassed and almost afraid to hear it, of how they contributed to that process. And at the same time, those other people who are every day serving in so many ways. So it's good character, and it's that, like, you know, when people came back from war and they were the greatest generation, it's that type of character, and that brings our country together. But each has to recognize their roles in doing that. So there's a CEO, and then there's somebody who's really a great hero on the front lines, and they better damn work well together. So yeah. And then they have to have usefulness, and we've got to appreciate them. We're now at one of those defining moments that I've seen repeatedly. The 1930 to 45 period, if you go back in history, there's nothing new to this. And it's a defining moment in terms of how people are with each other. So when you look at it, will people come together? Or when it comes down to it, really, will there be a taking care of oneself? And what does that define? And how will that go? That'll be, I think, a defining moment. There are 4 things that are the driving forces of our economy and our lifestyle and wealth. And the first and most powerful is productivity, which comes from people learning and inventing, and it grows slowly. You know, 1 or 2 or 3% a year, it grows slowly, and it's not volatile because knowledge isn't volatile, but it grows, and that raises our living standards over a period of time. Then there's a short-term debt cycle. The short-term debt cycle is, you know, recessions and expansions and booms and recessions, that they last about 8-10 years. And then there's a long-term debt cycle. And that long-term debt cycle, which goes on about once every 50 to 75 years, is when you begin a new type of money and a new type of credit. That began in 1945. The New World Order, at the end of World War II, and with the Bretton Woods monetary system, created a new monetary system in 1945, a new money. So they wiped out pretty much the old money, or they largely disposed of it, and they began anew, and that's the New World Order, which was the American World Order, and we have seen it, and still 70% of the money and credit that exists in the economy is running by dollars. And what you have traditionally is the breakdown. And then the fourth influence is politics. And politics is largely how we deal with each other. And there's internal politics and there's external politics. The internal politics is, how do you deal with the wealth gap? How do you deal with the values gap? Do you have a common mission? Do we have an American dream that we can agree on and that we're pursuing that together? Or do you fight over wealth? So how people deal with each other internally. There's also external politics. So that politics means between countries. And you have a situation when there's a rising power challenging existing power. There is competition and there is a risk of war. And so how they deal with each other, so that whether there's a greater good or whether they are fighting with each other, is the defining moment. How we deal with each other. There's enough wealth to go around. But what do you do when you're outside the ring of support, let's say of the US dollar? And what is that going to be like for those entities? Or if you're within the ring of support, how will that bill be divided? And how will we be with each other? I think we're going to have to reconsider who has what is it about education and so on. So that's what we're in, I think.